October is here, and the Colts are a bad football team in a bad division. Good Monday morning to you. Colts are 1-2-1 as they get off to another horrific start in the division. In a divisional game, I guess it should be said, as I drop my wedding ring here. Just ugly yesterday. Made a valiant comeback attempt. Jonathan Taylor fumbles, and that's a reminder of when you get down 3 scores in the NFL, your margin for error is minuscule. And that was the end of that. I'm Kevin Bowen. Eddie Garrison is across the way. Just shocking to see that performance. I was pretty confident in the Colts coming into Sunday. It is the worst rushing effort in the Frank Reich era, and it happened against the 32nd ranked run defense. That, I think, adds to the frustration. Obviously, a good amount of big picture stuff to get to today. But, Eddie, let's just begin overall thoughts. The slow starts. It's awful. It dates back to the end of last season. The fact that you have been down 23-3 in Week 18 in Jacksonville, 20-3 Week 1 against Houston, 24-0. Obviously, that was a score in Jacksonville. And then 24-3 yesterday. It's just a recipe for disaster. Particularly, again, when these games should mean a little more. Like, at the bare minimum, they're divisional games, so they should mean something. But then you factor in what additionally should be at stake, a playoff berth in Week 18, and the Week 1 drought, the Week 2, the issues in Jacksonville. And then yesterday, when Jim Irsay's as public as he was last week, and really, privately and publicly, he stated a very aggressive stance in what he thinks about what Tennessee has done to Indianapolis. God, man. It's amazing to think that the Colts continue to dig themselves these holes in these divisional games. Yeah,
I totally agree with you. And once again, a couple things first. Alex questioned last week, remember about the tight ends? Well, I think he knew something that we didn't know.
Yep, and that'll be what I liked. Yeah. Not a lot, but yeah, we'll certainly hit on that.
But when you look at just kind of like the snap count and utilization of players, like we were talking about this before we started recording the pod. Nyheim Hines, only 32 snaps. I think that was in there, maybe 23.
First touch comes with like 4 minutes to go in the third quarter.
Yeah, Michael Pittman Jr., 0 targets in the second half. It was 32%, only 21 snaps for Nyheim, but no targets at all for your best wide receiver. I thought Pierce looked good, and I know we'll hit on that later, but I mean, it just looked like the Colts from Week 1 and Week 2 and not the Colts of Week 3. So the success they had in Week 3 against Kansas City did not translate over to Week 4 against Tennessee. And you can argue the offensive line for Tennessee is worse than what Kansas City has. There's not nearly as much money tied up for Tennessee as there is Kansas City. And I feel like the Colts couldn't generate much, if any, consistent pressure on Tannehill. And they couldn't set the edge either, which allowed him to convert that third down in the final stages of the fourth quarter.
And before we get into what I didn't like, what I liked, let's just start right there with what you said. You brought up the Kansas City game. And I think we left Wednesday's podcast with, was that the outlier? NFL seasons are long. There are outliers everywhere. I mean, the Colts have been a part of it on good sides and bad sides of it over the years. That's how this league is wired. Last year, Jacksonville beat Buffalo in a game. It's not a true indicator of either of those two teams.
New York beat Cincinnati.
Sure. There are one-offs. And the question was last week a one-off? Did Kansas City gift you everything that you needed and you simply just aren't a good football team? And the Colts sat here, and their performance yesterday indicates that if you look at this season, if you date back to last year, ever since Christmas, they have been a bad football team. Because I'm a big believer in trends. And the recent trend in 4 out of your last 5, you've been down 3 scores. You've played divisional teams that I don't think are that great when you compare them to the rest of the NFL. And yet, if you add up all those quarters, the vast majority of them, you've been the worst football team on the field. I haven't said that very often about the Colts in my history covering the team. Hell, just in my lifetime, frankly. Mm-hmm. If you are a Colts fan under the age of 40 right now, Eddie, this is pretty rare for you. You're not playing good football. and you don't have a young quarterback on the roster that offers this glimmer of hope. You think about it. 2017 season, Andrew Luck was still here when you went 4-12. 2011, you were bad, and what waited for you at the end of the season was the generational draft pick of an Andrew Luck. And if you go back to 2001, when you were 6-10, you still had Peyton Manning. So again, if you're under the age of 40, this is really, really foreign territory. It's foreign territory for Jim Irsay as an owner. He's had a pretty good run.
Yeah.
He's used to having some sort of hope at quarterback. That's not there right now. So how the rest of the season unfolds and this weird dichotomy of the AFC South is never going to be that far away. The top of it, of course, is really going to be fascinating to watch. So let's get into what I didn't like from yesterday. And what did I start off with? I assume it's the run game.
Correct. Jonathan Taylor's run game in his now 4 career games against the Titans. 46 carries, 176 yards, and a 3.8 average.
Gosh, I didn't realize it was that ugly.
Well, last year, if you combine the 2 games, it's 26 carries for 134 yards. Of course, yesterday he had 20 attempts for 42.
20 for 42, Eddie. That's 2.1 a carry. It's one of the worst marks of his career. In total, you were under 2 yards per carry. That is absolutely awful. And to make matters worse, it happened against the 32nd ranked run defense.
I want to propose this question to you. He was on the injury report last week, I think, with a toe injury. He missed a practice. Do you think that ailed him at all in the game?
I want to make this very clear. I think the run game issues, the root of it, comes down to controlling the line of scrimmage and the inability to do that at a level it's necessary.
Agreed.
But I also sat up there in the press box and looked down and thought to myself, there are some creases at times. Out of his 20 runs, am I acting like there were creases on 12 of them? No. But there were some runs that there were some creases. And it looked a little bit reminiscent of Taylor early on in that rookie year. Just not fully trusting it, maybe not fully believing in. He came from a much different system at Wisconsin than what NFL systems are asked to do from a run game standpoint. And I did notice some of that yesterday from Taylor. Now, maybe some of that was physical, to your point, Eddie. Maybe some of that was not totally put my foot in the ground, trust the toe injury, and take off. I thought Derrick Henry just ran a little bit more aggressive, for lack of a better term, trusted it a little bit more. But again, the root of it for me comes down to you can't control the line of scrimmage against a team that entered Sunday allowing nearly 6 yards per carry. That's awful. That's terrible. And if you're not going to be there as an offense right now, you're going to continue to be this team that can't score more than 20 points. And that's a clear issue right now. We'll get into, and I guess I'll wait for Twitter questions, because I think we got a lot of these in Twitter questions, but I keep coming back to the Jim Irsay tweet last year during the playoffs, Eddie, of in this league, it's proven you need a quarterback and you need an offense that can score 30 in regulation. The Colts have played 4 games, one that went past regulation, and they haven't gotten over 20 this season. The run game yesterday, not only your rushing performance, Taylor and company, but also the run defense, because this is not a good Tennessee offensive line. I would argue that Derrick Henry, this game yesterday, will be one of his best of the season. I don't think this is going to be the norm for Tennessee this year, and yet Tennessee established Henry early. They got him going. It set the tone for the entire afternoon, and you had no answer for him and over 5 yards per carry. And again, you are the top-ranked run defense in the league entering yesterday. So before we get big picture, we've got to focus on the game. And that, to me, told the whole story. In this matchup, with how these two teams are built, how these two teams believe in their starting running back, it comes down to that matchup so often when these two teams meet. And again, Tennessee owned the line of scrimmage. Their running back was the better one, clearly, in this game. And the Taylor fumble was huge. Again, you have no margin for error at that point when you get down 3 scores. But if we're going to boil it down, it was an F out of the rushing offense, and I would say a D- out of the rushing defense. And in a game like this, you just can't have that.
That, and you need some turnovers. Colts didn't force any.
Good point.
They did not force a single turnover. They didn't really. I feel
like they didn't sniff a turnover.
No, they didn't even have any dropped interceptions.
Right. I'm going to look up right now how many passes that they defensed. I don't.
21, I think, was the final number for Tannehill. He was 17 at 21.
Oh my gosh, dude, that was a goose egg. 0 passes defensed. That's extremely hard to do in the NFL. So Tannehill had how many attempts? You said 21.
21, yeah. 4 incompletions.
Colts didn't get one hand on the ball. God, that's awful. That's so bad.
And that's not even like they don't even have A.J. Brown. They have Robert
Treylon
Woods.
Burks got hurt halfway through the game. I mean, God, that's so bad. I didn't even realize that.
Another slow start was another part of that, what you didn't like yesterday.
Again, if I'm Jim Irsay right now, I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. I just publicly went on Twitter and did all that, and that's how you start? And I go back to what I said in the opener, Eddie. These 4 games in the division with all of this at stake, and you have been down 23-3, 20-3, 24-0, 24-3. You guys know, huge believer in game flow. There's an element of like when you come back in these games, it almost is like, hey man, did you see Dwayne Washington Jr. in the fourth quarter for the Pacers last night? I know the Pacers lost by 20, but Dwayne had 18. There's a little element of like, at some point, water finds a little bit of level, and it's just, there's a freedom and an ease on both sides of the ball that you just kind of naturally score, naturally move the football. It's a golfer that's 15 shots back going to Sunday of a PGA Tour event, and he shoots 65. Well, where was he shooting 65 when he was on the leaderboard?
Yeah.
When it really matters, when there's serious game pressure on you. These starts are inexcusable. That's supposed to be the scripted part of your game plan. That's supposed to be what you've drilled all week.
So who do you attribute that to? Is it players for lack of execution? Is it lack of preparation?
It's got to be a little bit of both. I mean, sure, some of it is on the players. You would like to see a sense of urgency in these moments. You would like to see some high-character individuals realize the moment, realize the urgency, and how inexcusable recent performances have been and step up. But there also is an element of, what about the preparation? What about this coaching staff knowing what these guys need throughout the week? What makes them tick and what needs to be there on game days? So the slow starts, to me, these are occurring against mediocre to bad football teams, and you're not putting any game pressure on them.
Mm-hmm.
So you're giving them belief. It's what Kansas City did last week to you. When Sky Moore muffed that punt, he gave them belief. He gave the Colts belief, and they needed that. The Colts are doing that to these other teams. And, I mean, obviously, Danico Autry, a great player, and Quentin Nelson to start the game or on that opening drive. But when you set up that early short field, all of a sudden Tennessee's like, hey, here we go. Looky here. Look what we found. And that just, to me, sets up the entire 60-minute game, and you watch it unfold from there.
Before we get into what you liked, on the Colts postgame show yesterday, we received a lot of calls regarding the nature of what you were talking about, a sense of urgency, a pep in their step. And multiple callers asked about Frank Reich's lack of energy or lack of a pep in his step or a willingness to get into somebody. And both Barry and Bill were like, no, this is the NFL. I want you to coach me. I don't need that. But when you look at the landscape of the NFL and you look at how some of the new hires are, you look at a Robert Saleh, you look at a Dan Campbell, Sean McVay, to a little bit of an extent, Nick Sirianni even, all these guys are like show emotion all the time. And it just feels like whenever you watch Frank, it's hardly if ever there.
Yeah, and obviously this is a little bit more of a bigger picture question, Eddie, but it is something that I would like to think at the NFL level, most, if not all of these guys could be pretty self-motivated.
Correct.
But I keep on coming back to the message that you hear during the week. When does that become a bit stale? And how you handle Monday through Saturday can impact how these guys feel from a locked-in standpoint, an urgency standpoint, however you want to define it, and that's lacking. Have there been coaches that have Frank Reich-type demeanors that have had success in the NFL? Without question. But you see the reverse of it, and I would think most people, especially at the NFL level, have dealt with coaching that's been on the reverse of it, so they would probably cater to that a little bit more than Frank's mindset. And I've said this a lot about, and this goes for any coach really, when you hear stick to the process, that to me is such kind of a tired phrase because from my opinion, results have to influence process. Mm-hmm. If you're not getting it done, if you're down 3 scores in 4 straight divisional games, please don't spew process to me because clearly the process is not working. It's not getting the answers that are desired. Does it need a total overhaul? Do all of a sudden you practice on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? Like, no. But stuff has to change. You have got to start doing things differently, or else the definition of insanity is going to be alive and well for your football team. And right now, the slow starts are absolutely a clear issue. And if I'm Jim Irsay, I'm thinking, this has got to be a reflection on my coaching staff. And that would have me worried.
Jinx. What I was going to say is not much for the Colts to really, or for you to really like about this game, other than the tight ends and Alec Pierce. So let's start with the tight ends.
Yeah, nice note that the Colts sent out yesterday after the game. That's the most receiving yards for a tight end group in a game this season, 180 total. Eddie, they had 11 targets and caught all 11 of them. I thought some scripted up nice moments in terms of getting them in space. The crosser seemed to be really effective. Mo Alley Cox, 6 for 85. Kylan Granson, 4 for 62. And then Jelani Woods had the one grab for 33. So, very nice day for the tight end position. And then Pierce, we said it all last week. The go ball needs to be in the game plan every single week. I would like to see more than one attempted, just kind of the state of your offense right now. But you brought it to my attention before the podcast started. I didn't realize it until you said it. No targets for Michael Pittman in the second half. If that's going to be the case, and Pittman's going to be bracketed like he's going to be bracketed, you have got to tap into other areas, and you need your tight ends to step up, and you need Pierce to make the plays that he's making. Really consecutive strong weeks from Pierce. It's not just the go ball. It's the other route tree stuff that it's like, okay, these are the questions that you had about him getting to that complete NFL-type wideout, and there's been a couple flashes of that. So I think you got to be highly encouraged with what Alec Pierce is showing. And again, tight end-wise, you just see those guys in the open field, and you know they offer a skill set that you really, really like. It's hard to bring them down. Granson, a little bit more of a speed guy, of course. But you got back into this game, ironically enough, kind of with your passing offense. Mm-hmm. You kind of tap into that aspect of it, which is a bit odd. So I did want to mention that as something that I thought was a big strength for you in the positive direction.
Something I like, Paris Campbell, 4 for 43, caught all 4 of his targets, got a little involved in the passing game finally.
Yeah, his playing time decreased a little bit. It seemed like the tight ends they bumped up, didn't really bump up Pierce too much. But yeah, Campbell did have 4 for 43, like you said. Still would like to see him get a little bit more of kind of design touches, just if you can tap into any of that speed. In the offensive usage area, the Hines usage is head scratching. And, this is just a little bit of to some, this might be a nitpick. And we'll get into Matt Ryan questions, I think, in the Twitter questions, Eddie. Mm-hmm. But Matt Ryan missing Michael Pittman in those 2 red zone targets, the 2 goal-to-go targets early in the game, you cannot have that. That's why you got Matt Ryan to throw with anticipation, to make the plays in the red zone, in goal-to-go situations. The timing of those plays, it looks so small. It seems like, oh, man, he just missed it by a foot. That would have been a touchdown in college. Those are the plays good football teams make, good offenses make. And at that point of the game, it was 14-0. If you're able to score a touchdown there in those goal-to-go situations, you cut it to a one-possession game. I just think psyche-wise, it just feels a little different. And you had to settle for a field goal there, and that's the stuff that you can't have. And this offense right now is missing that. The ball security issues from Ryan are one thing, but he's got to have the ability to fit those balls into those small windows. And that's the expectation of why you made the trade for him. You felt like you were upgrading for him, upgrading from Carson Wentz in those areas of the field, and you didn't feel it on that drive. And I just don't think you're an offense that creates enough of those opportunities to miss on those opportunities. So I did want to point that out before we get to Twitter questions.
One final question and note from me here. I want to just tip my hat. Zaire Franklin, 15 total tackles. I thought he played his ass off defensively. He was flying over the field. And second thing that we have yet to talk about, Kevin, the return of Shaq Leonard. Initial thoughts on how you think he did. I know Frank said he'd have to review the film, but from what it was sounding like from Barry Krause, former linebacker, Shaq didn't look too good.
No, I thought he looked like a guy that wasn't totally comfortable being out there at 80 or 90%. I know he had 2 tackles in the first 2 plays of the game, but I didn't see the same Shaq Leonard that I'm used to. I guess Darius Leonard, frankly, if you go back to how high level of player he was. And then just concussion-wise, I just feel absolutely awful for him because...
Well, that was a horrific hit.
Yeah, and I want to make this clear, Eddie, obviously you are not saying that, well, it'd be better off if that guy had a concussion versus that guy. Like, that's the last thing you want to see in any NFL game, and unfortunately it's part of playing the game of football at this level. But for everything Leonard's been through this last year... you just worry about him, man. I mean, he's been through a whole lot physically, a whole lot mentally, and any sort of injury I think you pay attention to for him right now. And a concussion with everything going on in the NFL, I think you pay even more attention to it. Now, Zaire said after the game he seemed to be in good spirits. I think he drove home Leonard, so those are all good signs. Obviously, he was really bloody leaving the field, but you just feel terrible for him. And obviously on a short week, him and Jonathan Taylor... Leonard's not going to play. I mean, he's not passing concussion protocol by Thursday. At least I don't think he can. And then Taylor, we'll see. Kind of conflicting. I know Zach Kiefer said high ankle sprain. The Colts are kind of fearing that. I think Eden Rappaport mentioned that they don't believe it's too serious, but still, a short week with a limited running back, not ideal.
Agreed. Twitter question number 1 comes from Bailey. In the locker room, when asked what to say to the fans, all the players kept saying was, "We've been here before," and they'll right the ship. Is that not the problem? 5 of the first 7 against the South, and they're acting like they can just keep turning things around. We're winless through the first half of division play, KB.
Bailey, I think you're spot on. I really hope the players don't believe those words. These aren't the same starts. I don't want anyone to tell me these are the same starts as 2018 or 2021. Nope. You're losing divisional games. You're getting... run out of respective buildings for large chunks of those games. And last year, I guess let's just look at last year. You lost the Rams by, a field goal? The Ravens game, you had a huge lead in and blew that. And then that Titans game, Wentz looked like me out there trying to maneuver.
Yeah.
So, you don't have those types of performances and or, I guess, injury excuse so far this season in 3 of those losses you had last year. I haven't felt that this year. So I can't go there. I'll go back to what I said earlier. It's about trends. It's about bigger than 1 or 2 game outliers or 1 or 2 quarter outliers. Someone said to me last week, "Oh man, Colts have been a really good 4th quarter team this year." Okay,
because they've been down.
Yeah, that's part of it.
And the prevent defense comes in. Yeah.
Yeah, it just. Yeah, I can't go there yet.
I can't either. I mean,
I can't.
In comparison to those years that you mentioned, I mean, there were areas in which you could point to, be like, okay, this is the problem, let's fix it. This seems more mental and execution than anything else, not really X's and O's.
And yeah. I got other thoughts, but I know we got a lot of Twitter questions.
This is from Eric. How many first downs throughout the game did we continue to run for 0 to 2 yards? I'm assuming he's referring to the first play on first down. The defense knew it was coming, and it seemed like we wasted first down too many times.
Yeah, I thought one of your biggest issues yesterday, Eddie, was early down success. And by that, I mean lack of success.
Yep.
I mean, you were behind the chains so often, so early, and what that does is you obviously have to get more guys out on routes. And now Danico Autry and Jeffrey Simmons can do what they did to you. So I thought you got way behind the chains early in those downs, did not get into third and manageable situations at all. And that, to me, was just a really glaring issue.
Dustin, 320-ish yards for Matt Ryan yesterday were from receivers not named Michael Pittman Jr. Which tight end should be the number one overall on the depth chart? All three have been great thus far.
I kind of like how they're handling playing time. It probably is Allie Cox, Granson, and Jelani Woods in that order. You know, obviously Allie Cox is your best blocker out of those three, so you want him out there so you aren't tipping your hand too much. He hasn't really done a ton in the receiving department until yesterday, but I think it's a nice job by Frank Reich. Again, I thought they schemed up some good opportunities for those tight ends. You know, Pittman, this is going to be the coverage, man. Like we saw it at the end of the Kansas City game. Tennessee did it yesterday with Kevin Byard over the top. This is going to be what Pittman has to expect, and the Colts should expect week in and week out. So you're going to have to continue to rely on your tight end by committee, try and get Pittman isolated in some situations, tap into Hines more. You know, again, Pierce. This is where you're at right now.
Big test for Pittman on Thursday. He'll face Patrick Surtain. Cameron, Old Daner, and Joe all ask a similar question in regards to Jim Irsay was supposedly furious about the season-ending loss to Jacksonville and losing to the Tennessee Titans. Yet here we are and no changes. Too much time with music and not enough on football, or does he even really care?
Yeah, we obviously got a ton of Irsay big picture related questions. I know a lot of people are curious about like if or when or should I think the Colts will make a move. I've never been like a huge fan of the end season firing. To me, it's just kind of a shrug of your shoulders. Like instead of the scapegoat being Rodrigo Blankenship and Danny Pinter, now it's the head coach, which I guess it matters in that you're sending a message to your locker room. But like, I mean, like, do they feel that message then the next year? You know, does that like carry over? I mean, hell, this team can't even feel the message from 1 week to the next. So what makes me think they're going to all of a sudden feel it in season firing? Now, obviously, if there's a young guy on the staff you want to evaluate, then I see a little bit more with that. Bubba Ventrone would probably be the one guy on this staff that you probably would point to in that. I'd love to see the history just kind of on like interim coaches that have become mainstays at their respective places. It just seems super rare, and obviously it's not an ideal situation. I think what Jim Irsay has to ask himself is this. What's the standard for my franchise right now? This is year 6 for Chris Ballard and year 5 for Frank Reich. Currently, the Colts are what? Probably 12th in the AFC, something like that. Last year, they finished 8th. The year before that, they finished 7th. The year before that, they finished 10th. So you are on a 3-year cycle, now into this 4th year, of being an average to below average team in this conference while playing in the easiest division in this conference. And you just handed them significant contract extensions before last season. So you've got to ask yourself as the owner, what is an acceptable standard in year 5 and year 6 of this regime, particularly one that you called the GM the greatest GM hire of the 21st century? Is that living up to it? I would argue no. So those are the questions that I think Jim Irsay has to ask himself. Again, on the Irsay embarrassment meter, yesterday was a major step. He went public. He didn't go public after the Jacksonville shutout on Twitter, videos, anything like that. No, he didn't do that. But he went public last week about this game with Tennessee. And the response, you're down 24-3 in your own building. In your own building. I think that needs to be emphasized. The other stuff, that had happened away from home. Now it's happening in your own building. What's next on the embarrassment meter? You got Jacksonville at home, and you got Washington at home this month. 2 home games left. I don't need to remind anybody of where those would fall in Irsay's opinion. The history of Jacksonville is well documented, and obviously the history with the Washington quarterback. I said the Washington quarterback. It's almost like he has like a dirty name, like their old nickname that I'm not allowed to say. Carson Wentz. Those are the ones I circle a little bit more. And I know a lot of people can say Jim Irsay has never fired a coach in season. Eddie, I would argue what I said earlier. The Colts have never been in this situation. Mm-hmm. They have, in Irsay's tenure as owner, which he took over like 96-ish, right around there. They've never been with serious preseason expectations starting to fail to this degree and don't have the hope of some young quarterback sitting there. So this is just different. It's very different. So how he responds to that, I'm curious to see, because I don't think he's used to this based off the type of success that his franchise has had.
Stuart and Chris, both very similar questions that submitted via Twitter to both Kevin Bowen and I. What happened to the counterplay that they used to run with Nelson pulling to the right and JT runs for a big gain, or even some cases Marlon Mack dating back to when Jonathan Taylor was not in Indianapolis Colts just yet, compared to running it up the middle 20 times. It's not a good game plan.
We had Jeff Saturday on our show this morning, Eddie, and he mentioned that in the zone run scheme the Colts use, he feels like there are basically the opposing defense is doing a great job of really pinching from the edge. And I think some of this can be pointed to the edge guys you lost blocking-wise, Jack Doyle being atop the list, but they're kind of pinching from the edge, and it's collapsing what you want to do in the interior of the offensive line and the run lanes. And I think you see that. I'll go back to what I said earlier. By no means are you controlling the line of scrimmage. And I do think there are elements that I would like to see a little bit more perimeter-based stuff, just frankly to get your athletes in space. I know Jonathan Taylor isn't necessarily just this darting, make you miss guy. It's just not how he's built.
Not like Christian McCaffrey.
Stuff. Yeah, exactly. But I do think there are times where I'd like to see him get a little bit more ahead of steam, get a little bit more of an in space. Derrick Henry, I felt like, and part of this is Tennessee lines him way back behind the line of scrimmage, I felt like he got downhill a lot quicker, whereas I felt like Taylor, it's just kind of choppy, and he doesn't have the same sort of room to operate, if that makes sense. So I do think there are some run game issues. But, I've said this all along about running back, and I think a lot of this goes to big men in basketball. For a big man to truly be effective, you need guards to get him the ball. Someone's got to get you the ball. So opposing teams can take away a lot of that. They can obviously defend the ball really aggressively and not let those entries to occur. They can front the big man. They can double the big man when he gets the ball in the post. And the same, I think, can be said for running backs in football. You can just crowd the box. You can just load it up and say, we'll just play man outside, but we're going to take away the run. If you really want to be committed to it, you can try and do that. I think what was worrisome yesterday is it's not like there was just some, loaded boxes all afternoon. You struggled against some lighter boxes as well.
Jonathan Taylor, per Next Gen Stats, spends about 2.8 seconds behind the line of scrimmage, which is about in the middle of the pack in terms of running backs on their average time spent behind the line of scrimmage.
Too much invested in your O-line for him to be there.
This question comes from David. Hey, Kevin, at this point, I think the Colts should practice fumble recoveries on offense instead of defense. What is wrong with the offense? Almost everything is designed deep and needs time to develop, which this O-line cannot provide. Taylor can't get any form of holes to run through. You bring in another veteran who can make pre-snap reads, encouraging the quick rhythm offense on quick slants and etc. To keep drives alive with slow and methodical movement. But then you just botch it by calling post or fade routes. Why aren't we running an offense similar to 2020? Feel like we'd had more chances of success since we clearly can't run this current offense.
You go back to 2020, I would argue that you had better offensive line protection. I'd also argue that your quarterback was a little bit more cognizant of holding on to the football. I mean, I know Ryan's getting hit at a high rate, but again, I'm not absolving him from that. He's bringing some of those hits upon himself, and he's just got to hold on to the football. One of my buddies texted me this morning and was like, at least Jacoby held on to it when he was getting hit.
Yeah.
You cannot cough up the football like he's doing. I think the root of the offensive issue just lies up front. And, there are elements, I think, at every position group you can point to. I still think you lack really dynamic playmakers at the pass-catching spots to naturally get open or win one-on-one. I do think that's part of it. Just flat out offensively, though, Eddie, I watch the Colts and I just think – I watch the Colts offense and I think, dude, they look old.
Yeah.
Like, you compare them to other NFL teams.
Oh, yeah.
They look old, they're built old, and they play old.
I mean, last year we saw some unique and some creative play calls and designs from Frank, and I feel like we haven't really seen that much motion that you see across the NFL in comparison to previous years.
I would agree. I mean, I know certainly I've mentioned on this podcast before, if you look at the points per game standpoint, the Colts have been, a pretty good team. Very good team under Reich, with the amount of quarterback turnover that you've had. But I there's no defending that. The Hines usage would throw in there as well. And I mean, think about it, man. You've scored 20 points or less in every game this season. Last year, with Carson Wentz, you scored 20 points or less 4 times the entire year. One of those was the game when he was clearly hobbled. Obviously, you had the poor end of the season where you had 2 of those other games. But think about that, man. 20 points or less in each of the first 4 games. And I don't think anyone for a second looks at Houston, Jacksonville, Tennessee, and Kansas City and thinks 85 Bears up and down the field.
Yeah.
That adds to it.
Yeah. Cole, at what point does Jim Irsay become responsible for this team underachieving? He calls the shots. He's the all-knowing football genius, and here we are. Last week's win against Kansas City was great, but doesn't mean much if you can't beat the Titans. We're talking about the guy who extended Ryan Grigson and Chuck Pagano and our current regime. P.S. I don't know necessarily that Carson Wentz was the answer, but he was definitely a scapegoat. Jim Irsay did not like the fact that he was unvaccinated, and that seems like too personal of an issue to me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of validity to what Cole said right there. Let's start with Nyheim Hines had the quote after the game yesterday. Honestly, I think it's been the offense. The defense has done its job. I mean, I would agree with that. I go back to that Irsay tweet from last year, Eddie, last January. You can see clear as day the final 8 NFL playoff teams. You need a QB and an offense that can score 30 or more in regulation. Like, he said it himself then. And yet, here you have the output of less than 20 points in each of the last 4 games. I mentioned earlier the slow starts. If I'm Frank Reich, I'm sitting here and thinking to myself, what does that say about our coaching staff? That would be my question right now with Frank Reich. What does that say about my coaching staff, and what does 20 points or less in each of these first 4 games say about my offensive-minded head coach? Those would be my issues right now, Frank Reich related. But then I would go to Chris Ballard and think, wait a minute. You have a blueprint that is probably the contrarian in today's NFL, and you can disagree with the blueprint, but let's put that to the side for a second, and let's just focus on what Chris Ballard believes in, okay? He believes in trenches, run, stop the run. I'm simpling it down, but that's that's where he believes in. He wants that to be the backbone. Right now, you've got no backbone. You got whipped in that area on Sunday, and more often than not this year, the number 1 highest paid offensive line has not sniffed coming close to the return on investment. The number 3 highest paid defensive line has not either. That's where, if I'm Irsay, I'm thinking to myself, man, again, not even thinking about the blueprint. Now, if I were the owner, I'd probably be thinking, and I asked Ballard this question last January, I can picture myself in the indoor facility saying to him, have you thought about altering, changing your blueprint, your roster building approach? I have that question. But again, let's say Irsay doesn't have that question. You would sit there and still think to yourself, whoa, wait a minute. What you believe in, what you've highly invested in, what you've committed gobs and gobs of resources to, that's not even coming close to working right now. Those would be major red flags for me, GM related and head coach related, with where you're at right now.
And Danny, back to last year, Kev, 6 straight games of 20 or less.
God, is it really?
Yep. Vegas, they only scored 20. Jacksonville, 11. And then if you would go to the week before that to Arizona, now a little bit of a fluky game because of COVID-related issues, they scored 22.
Boy, I will look it up after the pod, but I'm willing to bet the franchise has had, I don't know, maybe that 2017 or 2011 season. I'm going to guess it's been a while since they've had that run of offensive ineptness. And not only is your offense struggling right now, Eddie, and this goes back to the Matt Ryan ball security, you're putting your defense in some horrific situations. Horrific. You can't do that.
Looking up Colts scoring by year, but we'll get to the next Twitter question while I look that one up. From Andy, I followed Frank Reich's advice and drafted Nyheim Hines in fantasy this year. I'm sorry, Andy.
Gosh, man.
Frank's comments aside, it did seem plausible we would see an uptick in his usage this year with Matt Ryan at quarterback. Anything from Frank on why he's just not getting touches? Not only is he one of our more proven playmakers, he's getting paid a lot of money to not be involved. A short week and Jonathan Taylor's injury may force that to change this week, but it just seems weird that's what it will take. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I wish I had a clear answer on Hines. 4 minutes to go in the third quarter. As far as the short week, is it Philip Lindsay time? Philip Lindsay revenge game if Jonathan Taylor is banged up in this one. I don't get it. I think Hines is a guy that, I've said this a lot about him, a high percentage touch with the ability to make a big play. And I just don't feel like you've even really tried to put that threat on the field. And I think the byproduct of having him out there is a little bit more of like, hey, now you're putting a threat into the defense. There was a play yesterday, I guess it was the play that Tennessee iced the game on, where they lined up Henry at fullback. They faked it to Henry at fullback. Tannehill, little boot action, so you get an athletic quarterback on the move. And then he threw it to the guy's name I can't pronounce in the flat.
Okonkwo?
Yeah, that sounds good. To ice the game. And beautiful by Todd Downing. Beautiful. And that's with one real playmaker. Henry is it for them. Robert Woods, I guess, a little bit. But I thought that was beautiful. So, I asked Frank last week a little bit about Campbell. I guess I could ask him directly about Hines. But, Eddie, you were asking me, like, do I think Hines is in the doghouse? And I laughed when you asked me.
Yep.
And I laughed because, oh my gosh, that question sounds so laughable to me. But you would have evidence to ask that question. You have evidence to ask that question. So I shouldn't be laughing at it, but I'm laughing because the other alternative is crying. And that's where we're at with the guy. And I'm not one that puts a... Yes, you are paying him a good amount of money as well. That plays into it. It's not the end-all, be-all, but that plays into it.
Taylor has 81 carries. Matt Ryan has 9, and then Hines has 8.
And it's just not the care. Yes,
attempts.
That is something, but it's not like he's been that heavily involved in the receiving game either.
17 receptions on 19 targets. And I'm pulling up his game log real quick.
And I wish, for those of you that were at Grant Park, you saw this on a daily basis, unique ways for him to touch the football.
He had 5+ targets in each of the first 3 games. 6 week 1 and week 3, 5 week 2.
And we just have not seen that.
He had 3 opportunities yesterday, 2 targets, 2 catches, and the 1 rush attempt. This one comes from Daniel. I'm sure you may hear this, but to me, this version of Matt Ryan isn't better than last year's Carson Wentz. Do you think a second year of experience under Reich's system would have made Wentz the better version of Matt Ryan that we see now? I can see Matt Ryan's main problem is the offensive line, which he can't buy any time, and at least Wentz could do that. Seemed like Reich's offense needs a more mobile quarterback. I see us drafting a quarterback regardless of what happens the rest of the year.
Well, let's start here. I don't know if there's a thought that I have on the Colts versus what they have internally that differs more than their opinion on quarterback. And really, it probably dates back to Chris Ballard's first press conference, and it's not about one guy. I think what we've seen through 4 games is this. You need so much around Ryan solid or you're going to get exposed. You need to really be good around him, really be firm ground, foundation, Indiana limestone, baby. You need that around him, or else things are going to get exposed, and the ball security is such an issue. I wrote it yesterday, and this is not me saying that Matt Ryan is the worst quarterback in the NFL by any means, because I don't believe that. But I have seen nothing in the first 4 games that makes me think you should run it back with Matt Ryan in 2023. Now, part of that comes from the standard I have of going Band-Aid. When you go Band-Aid, you've raised the bar. When you go short-term, what Tampa Bay said to their fan base, what the Rams said to their fan base is, when we're going to go here, that means you hold us to a higher standard, because when you make that move, you stunt potential growth for a young quarterback. Because obviously Tampa's doing that. The Jets are doing something else. The Jags are doing something else. But, you can... the Colts went 3-13 in Peyton's first year. You can live with some of those growing pains when it's a young QB trying to grow and develop. The Pacers are going to have one of those seasons this year. But when you are bad, right now, in my opinion, the Colts are a bad football team in a bad division.
Yep.
It's October 3rd, but that's where they are a bad football team in a bad division. If you're going to be bad or mediocre, I'd much rather be bad or mediocre with 22-year-old under center than 37-year-old under center. So I think that's what adds to it right now. But to the mobile point of Daniel's question, it doesn't seem like the mobile trait is maybe as desired as it is in some other teams. To be fair, we haven't really seen the Colts totally commit to a young quarterback, of course, so we don't know that. But in just my brief conversations, that seems to be something that I've noticed.
This is from Conroy. With the talent on this team, what is the issue? Communication is getting to be tired excuse because we are in week 4 and these are all professional athletes. Is the coaching or not as talented as we thought? Is it coaching or are we not as talented as we thought?
I do want to say the highest paid guys, there's a lot of them not getting it done. A lot of them. So I don't want to act like there is an element, and this gets back to kind of the Frank Reich question you asked me earlier, Eddie, about his persona, his demeanor. I do think there's an element of this is professional football. You should show up and have some self-motivation.
Yeah.
And you should, but I know that's not necessarily going to be there for all 53 guys. And at the same time, your coaches do get paid big-time money. I mean, and I'm watching a Tennessee team yesterday, Eddie. I believe they started 3 defensive players who they've signed in the last month. They're without their top pass rusher, and they totally stymie Jonathan Taylor in the worst rushing performance of the Frank Reich era. One thing on the money front, good for Danico Autry.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? You're sitting there. You do everything the Colts asked of you in your 3 years here. You were durable. You were versatile. You were productive. You were
available.
Available at a position that the Colts have struggled with availability at. You were one of the very rare, constant, consistent performers all 3 years he was here. And you get to free agency, and it becomes a little bit of a bidding war between you and the division rival. And the team that signed you originally does not sweeten the pot. And this is one of those Ballard moves that falls into head scratching. This is kind of like left tackle for me. Again,
yes,
I understand wideout, but Ballard, I understand wideout because I know Ballard doesn't believe in it. Defensive line, though, that's a huge core Ballard belief. Versatile, available, productive. And I think Ballard has even mentioned this, and if he hasn't, I apologize, but I think this is kind of widely known in the NFL. I think interior defensive linemen have proven in this league, late 20s and around 30 is not some oh my God, father time, they're going to fall off a cliff. Guys still play into their prime, late 20s into 30s. And so Autry hit that free agency deal, former undrafted free agent. He's got some dog in him that I think is lacking. And him walking, oh man. I did not understand that one at all. I continue not to understand it. And what he did to Quentin Nelson and what he did throughout that game, he started the game and made a statement. He ended the game and made a statement. I mean, was he the best player on the football field yesterday?
You could argue that.
that one, he's probably, and this list is not very long, Eddie, of guys that like the Colts have let walk, and I've been thinking to myself, what? That list isn't overly long in the Ballard era.
Yeah.
You know, for the most part, he's re-signed his own, and I've agreed with a lot of that. But that one.
Scotty wants to see fire and brimstone rain down on the coaching staff. Most likely it will be a sun shower on a picnic. What is going to take to fix these obvious coaching issues and Jim Irsay to wake up from his sleepy daydream with his Beatles drum set? That's pretty aggressive there.
That was, Scotty. Scotty, before I get to that, Eddie, I believe I've got our stat that I was going to look up after the show, but you know what? I was going to test out the internet and see how we're doing here, okay?
Oh, you got it up and running over there?
6 straight games of 20 points or less, all right? In 2017, they went 7 straight games, so that would have been with Jacoby. Outside of that, the last time they've had a streak of longer than 6 games, 93? Yeah, 93.
Speaking of Jim Irsay, he just tweeted.
I saw that.
Many thanks to our great fans at yesterday's game. Red heart football emoji.
Did Drake the dog take his phone and tweet that? Come on. That's not what I want. I want a little fire. Fire and brimstone. How about that, Eddie?
Brimstone, yeah.
I mentioned this earlier. This is foreign time for the franchise. That stat is foreign. 6 straight games, 20 points or less. 2017 season, you had 7 straight games. Outside of that, the only time in this franchise's history that you've gone longer, I should say the most recent time you've gone longer because they didn't score points in the 70s, 1993.
How'd you find that? Football Reference?
I know some people.
Oh, okay.
No, I'll explain to you off air.
Okay.
93. I mean, Jim Irsay wasn't at that point, Robert Irsay was still alive.
Yeah.
93, I mean, if you are in the age group, again, of 40 or younger, you're not used to that. I'm not used to this.
Me either.
I just turned 33. You're a lot younger than I am. You're certainly not used to that. But think about that. You go out there Thursday night against a Denver team that is playing good on defense, definitely not good on offense, but you score 20 or less, you will tie the longest streak of 20 or less since 1993.
Wow.
For an offensive-minded head coach.
In a league where offense is such a
has only risen to, we cater to you. Offense, we cater to you. Here are the flags. Here are the opportunities to score points. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Josh asks, is it possible Frank is a great play designer and a bad play caller? Every once in a while, something he draws up works amazing, and it makes him look so smart, but then I feel like there are also so many times where my Twitter feed blows up with, what was that call? Tweets. And then I guess, is he just has a good offensive coordinator mind and nothing more, or does it seem that he's maxed out his ability as an offensive coordinator? If so, bad news for us, I suppose.
Yeah, and again, I know I said it a few weeks ago that, and there is evidence that, the point totals that he's had with Luck to Brissett to Rivers to Wentz, pretty darn good. But this year it's not that. Your offense has regressed, and he's the play caller. He's the one that oversees it. I don't think it's to the point where it's like Frank Reich is the worst offensive play caller coach in the world, but certainly you would not slot him in the, guru type of category. I don't think I've used that term for him, but if I have, clearly I was wrong on that front there. Who asked that again?
That was from Josh.
Yeah. I mentioned what the Titans did on that third down. Again, those are just some plays that, God, what a huge play to ice that game there. And unique. I was curious. What are they going to do here?
Yeah.
Kind of a long down and distance. Do they give it to Henry? Hell, do they go for it on 4th down? Try and win the game?
Yeah. That fit Mike Vrabel.
Right. It would certainly fit Vrabel. And I guess with Reich right now, part of it is offense. As I mentioned, Irsay, if I'm Irsay right now, I've got questions for my GM. I've got questions for my head coach. The head coach questions would be the offensive, and then I went public on Twitter on Thursday. I was tweeting like nonstop, and you come out and you're down 24-3 at home. Some boo birds, in that building, so deserve it. Bluebirds. These last 4 games would be getting my attention big time.
Did you walk down to the concession stands at all?
I did not. To get some Grover wings?
Yeah.
I did not, no. Did you?
No. I'm fortunate. Yeah. Unfortunate.
Yeah. I'm hoping that they keep those up. I did think, one thing note on Grover, Buckner played like 13 snaps. I mean, he was on a huge pitch count.
Yeah, 19 for 35%.
Was it 19? Yeah, that is a small amount for him. Grover made some plays, but there are also some moments where, they could double team him and kind of take him out and let Henry get downhill.
That could have been why the run game was so effective for Tennessee as well, with Buckner so limited and the Tennessee able to double team Grover.
Remember, defensive line depth, in particular defensive tackle depth, was a question. I think you felt that yesterday.
This is from Jason. We've only had a few of these Thursday night football games, but there seems to be fewer commercials and TV timeouts, resulting in a slightly accelerated pace. Is it possible for an up-tempo practice for the next few days before an opportunity for the Colts to gain an advantage over the Broncos, or at least try to negate the high altitude effects? Now, I want to point out the commercial aspect of this. That is incorrect. There's actually one more commercial in a nationally televised game than there is.
Really?
Yes, there's one extra commercial.
Well, you would know that with your production work, so thank you for sharing that. And I do believe someone was saying to me that it's going to be on Channel 6 locally. So if you don't have Amazon Prime and you're in the local market, the ABC affiliate here in town.
Oh, so it'll be ABC, not Fox?
I think so. I don't know that for sure, but I do believe that is the case. Jason, they're not going to practice this week. It's just all walkthrough. I mean, to be fair, I don't know if any NFL team practices anymore in between a Sunday and Thursday night game. Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I don't know. I don't. Part of me thinks you need an offensive jolt. You should tap into it. The other part is like, well, I don't know. You struggled in the heat down in Jacksonville. Is the altitude going to be the same issue for you? I know it's different, but is that the same? So,
Colt
These
Maniac.
are the 2 least scoring teams in the NFL, right? 31 and 32.
Got to be somewhere close, right? I mean, the Bears have to be there, right?
Yeah, I thought these are the 2 worst, but I would have to look that up. What do we got? A few more?
Yes, Colt Maniac. If we lose Thursday night, what do you think happens first, if at all? The Colts have a coaching fire, or the team gets different quarterback play? Thanks and always, and enjoy the pod. Go Colts. Sad face.
Yeah, thank you, Colt Maniac, for that. The Colts are the worst scoring team in the NFL. Denver is 4th to worst.
That's terrible when you consider
Chicago
the Bears.
is
at
16. Chicago's 30th. 16 points per game. Okay, what happens? Part of me thinks this: a 10-day break can lead to some stuff. When you have the mini bye week, the 10-day break offers you some time to do some things. I still have pointed out kind of the level of embarrassment. I think there are other things and other dates to circle in October. I would still be somewhat surprised. Let's say the Colts lose by 7 to 10 points on Thursday night. I would be somewhat surprised if Jim Irsay canned the head coach. Yeah, I would be.
Now, does it depend on the style of the loss?
Yeah, I mean, if you get, you lose by 30 or something, that probably changes a little bit. But I would be surprised if that happened. Now, who's next on the scapegoat list? You've gone from Hot Rod to Danny Pinter. Who's next? Is it position coach? Is it Chris Strauser on the O-line?
I mean, you're running out of people.
I don't think you're benching Matt Ryan. I don't think you're there. I know some people have called for Ellinger. I don't believe that you're there. Nor do I necessarily think that you should be. But, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, Colt Mania.
This is from MW. Hi, Kevin. Longtime listener from Saudi Arabia.
Wow. We've reached a lot of corners of the world. Thank you.
Yeah.
MW for that.
Hope you and the family are doing well in Indy. 3 weeks in, would you rather have Gilmore and Unique, Stephon Gilmore, Unique Ngakoue, or Rock Yassin and Chandler Jones? Also, you keep talking tiebreakers. That most likely won't matter since we have a tie on the record.
Well, yeah, yes, that is fair. I guess I mean a little bit more in the head-to-head category. Yesterday was another shot at that from a head-to-head standpoint with Tennessee and Jacksonville. Chandler Jones, no sacks this season through 4 games. He's got 4 quarterback hits. That's kind of a quiet start. That's a very quiet start for Chandler Jones. Yeah, I'd have to look a little bit closer at the Raiders' operation. I mean, I guess Rock is a little bit younger contractually. You know, Gilmore has got 1 more year left, and Yannick would head to a contract year after this season. So I don't know. I'll be totally honest. I haven't put a ton of stock into that. I'd have to look a little bit more at the Raiders and where they're at. I'm probably a little bit more like dynamic pass rusher over corner. So maybe I'd go Chandler Jones. But I also sit here and think if Yannick Ngakoue, and we're a long ways away from this happening, but if Yannick Ngakoue can re-sign here and continue to be the baseball card that he's been, which the back of his baseball card says 16 games, 9 sacks virtually every season, if you could get him for that for the next 4 or 5 years, then I would happily choose the first.
Garrett and Dara close out the show here. I hope I eat my words after the Tennessee game, but are there more than a handful of players playing to their expectations or exceeding thus far? Been following the Colts closely for about 15 years, and this is the largest I've felt a gap between my expectations for the team and the reality.
Read that final sentence.
Been following for the Colts closely for about 15 years, and this is the largest I felt a gap between my expectations for the team and the reality.
That statement right there, I think, is what Jim Irsay's got to come back to in evaluating things. You know, the bar was high, and the play has not sniffed that. That gap, you know, the question says 15 years. I mean, you could argue it's been even longer since the franchise has missed the bar by this much. And it's early, and again, it's October 3rd, and you know, try to react based off what happens the previous game and also look at the big picture and find that balance there. As far as individuals, I mean, Ryan Kelly, Kenny Moore II. I know he's been banged up. I like a little bit more out of DeForest Buckner. Who else? I mean, I know he's not getting paid handsomely, but it's such a great opportunity for Paris Campbell. You'd probably like to see a little bit more out of him. Hines, I don't know how much of it is
Ryan Kelly
within his control. Yeah, Kelly, I said that. You know, Braden Smith at times has fallen into that group. I thought Braden had a better day yesterday. But
a couple quick hitters for me here as we close out the pod.
Yeah.
I know we talked about this in the preseason leading up after roster cuts when Sam Ehlinger made the roster. You mentioned and highlighted this upcoming game for Thursday Night Football coming off a short week against a divisional opponent. Is there any chance that Sam Ehlinger we could see finally suit up on Thursday, even now considering that Jonathan Taylor may not be a full 100% and maybe you can get some read option in there with him and Hines?
Yeah, I mean, you did that last year on Thursday Night Football, so I think it's relevant to bring up again, Eddie. I haven't given it a ton of thought in the immediate aftermath of yesterday, but that'll be something to keep. You know, Thursday Night Football, weird stuff happens. Now, granted, you look at this year, you've had, I believe the home team has won all the Thursday night games. I'm talking about the short week Thursday night games, not the season
Correct.
opener. I think the last 2 weeks, the home team's won by 12 points in each of those games. So I am always interested to see what wrinkles, if any, teams do. You would think that there would be some Ehlinger package in there. But, you know, you also have to factor this in, Eddie. Do we see a little bit longer injury report this week? You know, let's say Blackman doesn't go. Let's say Leonard doesn't go. Let's say Taylor doesn't go. What nicks and bruises, you know, we're going to hear from Frank Reich here in about a half hour. What nicks and bruises from Frank developed in the game yesterday that maybe weren't reported during the game? You know, you always have that. You know, do all of a sudden you've got 4 or 5 guys out on the injury report, which kind of is typical for a Thursday night game. Does that impact maybe your availability for Ehlinger? Now, last year, you still were able to insert him, but I think that is something that I am watching for.
Couple notes for Denver real quick as we close this out. Javonte Williams goes down with a significant right knee injury from what Denver believes, so that's a big blow to their offense. He was their lead back.
That's a huge blow.
And then on the defensive side, Randy Gregory also went down with a knee injury. Both of them are expecting to get MRIs today, a.k.a. Monday.
Yeah, so that is something to keep an eye on. It's supposed to be a really nice night, it sounds like. Thursday night in Denver, so it's early in the year, but you're always kind of curious what the weather will look like for that one. Next podcast is going to come Friday morning. We'll try and keep that similar time. Several of you have sent in other questions that we just didn't have time to get to today, and or it's a little bit more big picture. So I feel like during the mini bye, you kind of have, like next week's podcast will certainly be some Jacksonville focus leading into what will be just a mass. Is it Jacksonville or is it Tennessee?
Jacksonville.
Yeah, Jacksonville first, then Tennessee, which will be just a monumental game, no matter what happens tomorrow night. So we'll get into some of that as the Colts play their second Jags matchup, have their second Jags matchup of the year. Anything else, Eddie?
I don't think so. You got anything?
No, I thought you were going to compliment me on my fantasy performance from this week.
Oh, I didn't check. How'd you do?
I think this is one of the, it's probably never happened in the history of my fantasy football experience, which I know everyone at the end of the podcast wants to hear about Kevin Bowen's fantasy teams. I think if Deebo Samuel just like acts like Deebo tonight, I think I might win all 4 of my fantasy matchups this week.
Ooh, let's take a look here.
Is 4 too many leagues?
No, I think that's the right amount. I'm in 6.
God, you got issues.
You got 132, so right now it's you and me competing for the highest scoring of the week.
I can't get rid of you, can I?
I got 153.8. You got 132 too, and you have Stafford going tonight.
Oh, so I still got a chance to tack on more, don't I?
Yes, sir.
All right, he's Eddie Garrison. I'm Kevin Bowen. Everybody have a great week, and we'll talk to you Friday to recap Colts and Broncos.